Hey gang, so I went pretty fast with that sketch, fast and furious, and I want to just loop back and talk about why that's working here. Um, so, as I was saying, this preload function isn't going to be relevant really because if we use function preload like we've done in the past, what we're going to get is nothing because when this runs the first time, there probably won't be any data yet. And we can we can test that out real quick. And so I'll just do that. I'll say instead of pushing the image circles here, I'm going to say image paths dot push image path, and we're going to in sketch we'll make a thing called image paths. And so that'll be an array, and we should, theoretically be able to push to that array. And we should be able to then say function preload images for each image. Images at I equals load image pass at I. So we would, here in this case, we would have a array of image paths, and we would load them. And then we could say in here, like we did before, images.for each push those in. So we should be able to load an image and grab those paths. And now one thing we come up against working with P5 is obviously this thing about loading an image. P5's textures, images, all those things, they don't want just a URL like our divs want. A div is perfectly happy. Just we pass in a URL, image.source equals a URL, and we load it in. P5 instead wants us to use this load image to load that URL in. And so here we can check this out and see what happens if I just use load image with the preload, and you'll see we get loading. We look in our console, failed to load resource. Nothing there. Undefined. Load image was expecting a string. So now what's happened is when function preload runs, there's like nothing there because the nature of the web. When we call this, essentially it's a lot like an event listener. When we're waiting for a change to this, it doesn't happen right away. There's a delay that will eventually image paths will be a thing. And we could test that out by saying in here console.log image paths. And let's see what we get now. So there, now we've got a bunch of images, but those images came in after, those images all came in after P5 tried to load. So P5 tries to load right away, and our sketch runs, our preload runs, and there's no image path there yet. So we know preload isn't going to work. We'll scratch that off. Now, what if we instead go with this image circle idea? And here, instead of image paths, then we're not going to do that. We're going to make a new image circle with image path. And so we'll push a new image circle. No, not that. We'll push that in our app. Every time we get an uploaded thing, we make a new image circle at image path. And you can see now, again, nothing's happening here. And why is that? Oh, there we go. So now it's happening again. It's all working fine. And that's because my image circle, we take in the image path and we load it with this promise. Now, this is the next thing I'm going to break. We'll just see how this works. So we take that out and we get nothing because that's where our image load is happening. But what we'll do is we'll say in update, we can say if there's an image path, and if this dot image loaded hasn't loaded, then we'll say load image. I will say this dot image equals load image this dot image path. And let's see what we get now. So we get that and nothing. So what happened there? Insufficient resources. Firebase storage P5 says it looks like I'm getting a lot of error messages. So what's going on here? I'm trying to load image of what I know is an image path, but it's not working. And again, what's happened is we don't have those image paths when we start. So what we need to do is we need to wait for those image paths to come. And this is just a very important aspect of working with JavaScript, generally speaking. So what we need to do is we need to use something called a promise. Let's just look at the Mozilla web developer's description of promises. And we can see that a promise object represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. And there's a lot in here, and I got to tell you, promises really freaked me out for a long time. We did look at them a little bit earlier in the semester, but I want to just reiterate what a promise is. And so what I'm doing here is to solve this problem. I've got a function or a method called create image promise, and I pass in the image path into that promise. And so this thing here, this function, this method, is going to take in that image path, and it's going to return a new promise. What is a promise? A promise is a promise that something will eventually happen. Just like when I promise you that I will, show up for class. Promise you that we'll have a workshop at a certain time. Or when somebody promises to give you some money back 10 days later. That's essentially what we're doing here. And that promise has a value called resolve, which is a function we can call when a condition has been satisfied. Very helpfully, load image and a lot of asynchronous code can supply you with a callback function that can run when something has completed. So instead of before I was just saying, we'll just load the image, let's do it right away, and just sort of hope for the best. In this case, I can say when I load, get rid of this, I'm not going to use that. When this load image has completed, let's call this resolve function. And that'll change the status of this promise that's being returned here. So this load image buffer gets set to this promise, which is, as I've been trying to explain, this very special type of function. And when this resolve gets called, this promise's status will change. And we can use that promise which is now stored in this value, this dot load image buffer, we can say when resolve happens, dot then run this function, and this function is just going to set this dot image loaded to true, and we can see that that should solve our problem, and so it does. So now this is only happening, this display method is only running when this dot image loaded is set to true. And that's maybe the worst description of what a promise is that you'll ever come across. But if you want to learn more, there's stuff at the MDN, or there's a lot of other great tutorial videos out there. I was just trying to really quickly show you how we can use those when we're loading images, loading sounds, or whatever. And I hope that helped a little bit. There's one more problem I'm going to address in the next video, which is you may be having a cross-origin scripting problem. And to do that, I'm going to actually set up a whole new project and use this code with a new firebase config. All right, see you in the next video.